Good Thursday morning, everyone, and welcome into today's daily Bible reading for October the 19th. Today we are reading together in First Chronicles chapters 21 and 22, which is going to be the chronicler's rendition of David's sin in the military census, and then we have his instructions to his son Solomon concerning the temple that Solomon would eventually build, this house for Yahweh. So let me get the text up on the screen for us. We'll read along together here in First Chronicles chapter 21, verse number 1. First Chronicles 21, verse number 1, the text tells us that Satan rose up against Israel and incited David to count the people of Israel. So David said to Joab and the commanders of the troops, "Go and count Israel from Beersheba to Dan, and bring a report to me so that I can know their number." Joab replied, "May Yahweh multiply the number of his people 100 times over, my lord the king. Aren't they all my lord's servants? Why does my lord want to do this? Why should he bring guilt on Israel?" Yet the king's order prevailed over Joab. So Joab left and traveled throughout Israel and then returned to Jerusalem. Joab gave the total troop registration to David. In all Israel, there were 1,100,000 armed men, and in Judah itself, 470,000 armed men. But he did not include Levi and Benjamin in the count because the king's command was detestable to him. This command was also evil in God's sight, so he afflicted Israel. David said to God, "I have sinned greatly because I have done this thing. Now please take away your servant's guilt, for I've been very foolish." Then Yahweh instructed Gad, David's seer, "Go and say to David, this is what Yahweh says. I'm offering you three choices. Choose one of them for yourself, and I will do it to you." So God went to David and said to him, "This is what Yahweh says. Take your choice, 3 years of famine or 3 years of devastation by your foes with the sword of your enemy overtaking you, or 3 days of the sword of Yahweh, a plague on the land, the angel of Yahweh bringing destruction to the whole territory of Israel. Now decide what answer I should take back to the one who sent me." So David answered God, "I am in anguish. Please let me fall into Yahweh's hands, because his mercies are very great. But don't let me fall into human hands." So Yahweh sent a plague on Israel, and 70,000 Israelite men died. Then God sent an angel to Jerusalem to destroy it. But when the angel was about to destroy the city, Yahweh looked, relenting concerning the destruction, and said to the angel who was destroying the people, "Enough, withdraw your hand now." So the angel of Yahweh was then standing at the threshing floor of Ornan the Jebusite. When David looked up and saw the angel of Yahweh standing between heaven and earth, with his sword drawn and his hand stretched out over Jerusalem, David and the elders, covered in sackcloth, fell face down. David said to God, "Wasn't I the one who gave the order to count the people? I'm the one who has sinned and acted wickedly. But these sheep, what have they done? Yahweh, my God, please let your hand be against me and against my father's family, but don't let the plague be against your people." So the angel of Yahweh ordered God, the seer, to tell David to go and set up an altar to Yahweh on the threshing floor of Ornan the Jebusite. David went up at God's command in the name of Yahweh. Ornan was threshing wheat when he turned and saw the angel. His 4 sons who were with him hid. David said to Ornan, and when came to Ornan, and when Ornan looked and saw David, he left the threshing floor and bowed to David with his face to the ground. Then David said to Ornan, give me this threshing floor plot so that I may build an altar to Yahweh on it. Give it to me for the full price, so the plague on the people may be stopped." Ornan said to David, "Take it. My lord the king may do whatever he wants. See, I give the oxen for the burnt offerings, the threshing sledges for the wood, and the wheat for the grain offering. I give it all." King David answered Ornan, "No, I insist on paying the full price, for I will not take for Yahweh what belongs to you, or offer burnt offerings that cost me nothing." So David gave Ornan 15 pounds of gold for the plot. He built an altar to Yahweh there and offered burnt offerings and fellowship offerings. He called on Yahweh and answered him with fire from heaven on the altar of burnt offering. Then Yahweh spoke to the angel. He put his sword back into the sheath. At that time, David offered sacrifices there when he saw that Yahweh answered him at the threshing floor of Ornan the Jebusite. The tabernacle of Yahweh, which Moses made in the wilderness, and the altar of burnt offering were at the high place in Gibeon. But David could not go before to inquire of God, because he was terrified of the sword of Yahweh's angel. Then David said, "This is the house of Yahweh, God. This is the altar of burnt offering for Israel." So David gave orders to gather the resident aliens that were in the land of Israel. And he appointed stone cutters to cut finished stones for building God's house. David supplied a great deal of iron to make the nails for the doors of the gates and for the fittings, together with an immeasurable quantity of bronze and innumerable cedar logs, because the Sidonians and Tyrians had brought a large quantity of cedar logs to David. David said, "My son Solomon is young and inexperienced, and the house that is to be built for Yahweh must be exceedingly great and famous and glorious in all the lands. Therefore, I will make provision for it." So David made lavish preparations for it before his death. Then he summoned his son Solomon and charged him to build a house for Yahweh, God of Israel. "My son," David said to Solomon, "it was in my heart to build a house for the name of Yahweh my God. But the word of Yahweh came to me. You have shed much blood and waged great wars. You are not to build a house for my name, because you have shed so much blood on the ground before me. But a son will be born to you. He will be a man of rest. I will give him rest from all his surrounding enemies, for his name will be Solomon. And I will give peace and quiet to Israel during his reign, for he is the one who will build a house for my name. He will be my son, and I will be his father. I will establish the throne of his kingdom forever over Israel." Or excuse me, I will establish the throne of his kingdom over Israel forever. Now, my son, may Yahweh be with you, and may you succeed in building the house of Yahweh your God, as he said about you. Above all, may Yahweh give you insight and understanding when he puts you in charge of Israel, so that you may keep the law of Yahweh your God. Then you will succeed if you carefully follow the statutes and ordinances Yahweh commanded Moses for Israel. Be strong and courageous. Don't be afraid or discouraged. Notice I have taken great pains to provide for the house of Yahweh. 3,755 tons of gold, 37,750 tons of silver, and bronze and iron that can't be weighed because there's so much of it. I have also provided timber and stone, but you will need to add more to them. You also have many workers, stone cutters, masons, carpenters, and people skilled in every kind of work in gold, silver, bronze, and iron, beyond number. Now begin the work, and may Yahweh be with you." Then David ordered all the leaders of Israel to help his son Solomon. "Yahweh your God is with you, isn't he? And hasn't he given you rest on every side? For he has handed the land's inhabitants over to me, and the land has been subdued before Yahweh and his people. Now determine in your minds and heart to seek Yahweh your God. Get started building Yahweh God's sanctuary, so that you may bring the ark of Yahweh's covenants, the holy articles of God, to the temple that is to be built for the name of Yahweh." And that is the reading of 1 Chronicles chapters 21 and 22. In chapter 21, we see this story that was first given to us, I believe, back in chapter, let's see here, in 2 Samuel chapter 24 is where we see this story first told in the previous historical accounts. And there is a very interesting difference between these two accounts, because back in 2 Samuel 24, we read that Yahweh's anger burned against Israel again, and he stirred up David against them to say, "Go count the people of Israel and Judah." In the Chronicles account, we read that Satan rose up against Israel and incited David to count the people of Israel. So which is it? Who's correct? And the answer very well probably is both. Both Yahweh and the adversary and the Satan were at work here. More than likely, it seems to be that there was something that Yahweh was disappointed and upset with the people and David about. So he allowed for the adversary to tempt David to do this thing. And what was the temptation here? Well, in our mind, why in the world would there be a temptation to count people? Well, it seems that the counting here would be a measurement of strength. And that seems to be the issue here with David. This was a moment of pride on his part. He wanted to see just how strong and mighty he and his military are. So he instructs for this census to take place. Now, Joab, for his part, seems to recognize this is not a good idea, and he tries to talk David out of it. In fact, he doesn't even include Levi and Benjamin in the count because this whole command was detestable to him. He seemed to understand that this was not something that was good to be done. But David's word prevailed, and he ended up doing it. And at this point, there was a great affliction that was brought upon Israel. And David admits to his sin. I've sinned greatly in doing this. Please take away your servant's guilt, for I've been very, very foolish. And while the guilt might have been taken away from him, punishment still followed. For Yahweh sends David's seer, God or Gad, sends him to David and gives him options. You can either have 3 years of famine, you can have 3 months of devastation by your foes, or you can have 3 days of the sword of Yahweh, where Yahweh directly would inflict the land in some way, or would afflict the land in some way. And David's answer is, well, if I've got those 3 options, not only do I take the shortest one, but I take that one as well, because I would much rather be the mercy of Yahweh as opposed to the mercy of nature or the mercy of my enemies. So Yahweh accepts this, and Yahweh does send a plague upon Israel. 70,000 men of Israel died. The text says that the angel of Yahweh was involved in this somehow. He was going towards Jerusalem to destroy it. And I almost wonder if this is a bit out of kind of chronological order. If it was David looking up and pleading to God that originally caused the angel to stop from destroying Israel. It says that the angel is about to go, but Yahweh told him, enough, withdraw your hand now. And it says the angel of Yahweh was standing at the threshing floor of Ornan the Jebusite. Then it says that David looked up, he saw the angel of Yahweh standing between heaven and earth with a sword drawn in his hand stretched out over Jerusalem. So again, it says whenever David saw him, his hand was stretched out over Jerusalem. But earlier it said that Yahweh told him to withdraw his hand. So what I'm saying is I wonder if what's told in verses 14 and 15 is the result of what happens in verses 16 through 17, I guess it is. That's what I'm wondering. I don't know if I'm reading that exactly correct, but that almost seems to be kind of the way it's playing out. Because what David does is he speaks to Yahweh and he says, listen, this is my fault. I'm the one that made a mistake. Please don't punish the people for a mistake that I made. Don't harm the sheep for the mistake of the shepherd. Don't let this plague be against your people. Let me be the one who suffers. So again, the angel stops from proceeding to punish Jerusalem specifically as well. And they are there at the threshing floor of Ornan the Jebusites, and the seer God is told to go and tell David he needs to set up an altar here. And what's interesting about this is, well, number one, just the transaction. David asks for the threshing floor and says, I'm going to pay. I'm going to be honest about it. So I'm not just going to take it from you because I'm the king. And I mean, he really could have. But again, David's a man of justice and righteousness. So he says he's going to pay full price. Ornan says, no, you can just take it. David says, no, I'm not going to take something that doesn't belong to me. I'm going to pay for it. And eventually, this particular place where David built an altar to Yahweh and offered the burnt offerings and the fellowship offerings, and where Yahweh responded with fire from heaven on the burnt offering, this place actually ends up being the site of the future temple, the temple that we're going to read about in chapter 22 that he is instructing Solomon concerning. And this is a very appropriate place for Yahweh's temple to be built because it was a place where Yahweh's grace and mercy was experienced, which is what the temple is. The temple is the intersectional point between heaven and earth, between the spiritual and the material, between the divine and that which is normal in flesh. And that's what David is experiencing right here. He's experiencing a moment of grace for his people. He is experiencing a moment of mercy toward his people, and that certainly was what the temple represented, a place of grace and mercy from God toward the people. So that takes us very, very easily into chapter 22, where we see David's preparations for the temple. Remember, he's not the one that is going to be able to build it for himself. We saw that going back to, let's see here, going back to chapter 17, where David wanted to build. Nathan initially told him to build it, but then God goes to Nathan, Yahweh goes to Nathan and says, hey, David's not going to build it. We find out why here, and it's because David has shed so much blood. So he was not going to be the one who could build this temple yet. That does not mean that David was not going to participate in the preparations for the building of the temple. Think about everything that we read here, all of the iron, I think about the stone, the gold, the bronze, the silver. I think about the timber and everything that would go into the temple. David had a firsthand part in playing in collecting many of these materials. Now, Solomon, he says, is going to have to do this as well. But David definitely got this process started and definitely got the ball rolling. Now, it's important to note, I think, here that David is not just wanting Solomon to be successful in the building of this temple, but he's wanting Solomon to live in such a way that this temple represents the strong relationship that he has between himself and Yahweh. So he instructs Solomon that he needs to be careful to follow the statutes and the ordinances Yahweh commanded Moses for Israel, to be strong and courageous. Don't be afraid. Don't be discouraged. Follow Yahweh in everything that you do. Be determined in your mind, verse 19, and heart to seek Yahweh your God. Get started building Yahweh God's sanctuary, so that you may bring the ark of Yahweh's covenant and the holy articles of God to the temple that is to be built for the name of Yahweh. So David here, instead of being someone who, we talked about this previously in chapter 17, who could have been very disappointed in the reality that he was not able to build the temple, instead of being disappointed in that, he instead was willing to put everything he had into preparing his son to experience this tremendous honor of being the one who would build this temple for Yahweh. Again, David might not be building it specifically himself, but he is going to have a part to play in it. And just thinking about our own lives, how often have we found ourselves wanting to play a particular role in some sort of good work or in some sort of plan that is going to be put into action? Have you ever anticipated having a particular role, but then realizing that's not actually a role and that you're going to be used in a different way in order to participate in whatever this thing is? That can be very disappointing. I mean, I know for myself, I know I'm not much of a singer now. I promise. My voice used to be just a smidgen better before I ruined it in college, yelling at sporting events. But in middle school, I remember had a tried out for a solo in the choir, and really practiced hard, really worked on that solo, really thought I had it nailed down, and didn't get the part. And I was very disappointed in that. But I still had a part to play in the whole of the choir. So sometimes we might aspire to a particular role within a group or within a project, within some sort of effort, but we might not get that. What do we do at that point? Do we just give up? Do we just say, well, good riddance with it? I hope y'all have a good time. I hope you fall on your face. Is that how he acted? Is that how David acted? Not at all. No. David knew that whether or not he was going to be the one building this house for Yahweh was a good work. It was a good project. It was something that was going to bring blessing to God and to his people. So he wanted not to sabotage the people who would get it done, but he wanted to set his son up for success. And that should be the attitude we have. We might not always get the leading role. We might not always be the point man or the point woman in some sort of project. But whatever part we can play in it, let us provide so that whatever it is we're trying to do, is successful. Let's try to set others up for success, even if we might not be the ones playing the role that we want to play. Certainly we see David doing that here within this text. Following great disappointment not being able to build the altar or not being able to build the temple, he still wants what is best, not for his sake, but for the sake of his God and toward the blessing of his son. If you have any questions or comments about this text here in 1 Chronicles 21 or 22, please feel free to leave that in the comment section below. And we will be back reading tomorrow from 1 Chronicles chapters 23 and 24, where we will read some details concerning the Levites within this chapter. Again, Chronicles is not a text where we're just dealing with every detail as we had in Samuel and Kings. There is much more theological focus here, and much more of that focus is on the kingship. It is on the throne. It is on the temple. It is on the priesthood, because all those things are things that were on the minds of people receiving the Chronicles. They were wondering about the king. Is the Messiah on the way? They were worrying about worship and proper worship of Yahweh. And all of these things are certainly involved in that. So that's why it seems that the chronicler is focusing on these things specifically. But again, if you have any questions or comments, please feel free to leave that in the comment section below. I appreciate you reading along with me on this Thursday. Hope you have a great rest of your Thursday. May God bless you in all that you do. And again, please tune back in tomorrow as we read together from chapters 23 and 24 of 1 Chronicles. Take care and God bless.